everyone, here's Nico from the Centron Foundation with another video about creating scenes using the Creator Hub. And this is another video about smart items. Yes, the rabbit hole goes even deeper. I recommend that if you didn't watch my previous videos about smart items, that you take a look, because we'll be building upon some of the stuff I covered there. So in previous videos we opened the button smart item and we enabled the advanced mode, and we saw that the button is really made up of a bunch of components. There's a transform and GLTF, but the more interesting ones are the action and the trigger. The action lists all of the actions that this item can perform, and the trigger tells us when these actions can run based on interactions from the player. Now, if we look at other items, you'll see that they don't necessarily have the same list of components, and in fact not all have a trigger, for example, and some even have other components. And I want to specifically look at the lever because it's very similar to the button, but it has one extra component that we haven't seen so far. So the lever has transform and GLTF as well as action and trigger, just like the button, has pointer, events, and multiplayer, just like the button. But what's really interesting is that it also has states. So the states component basically tells us what is the current state of this item at any given time. So for example, the lever can either be activated or deactivated, so basically with the lever pulled one way or the other. And it can only be in one of these at a time. It has a default state, which is deactivated in this case, and whenever we pull the lever it switches from deactivated to activated. You'll see that other smart items have something similar. For example, the door can be either open or closed, and it can only be one of those at any given time. The same applies to the chest, and there's a couple of other examples like those. So the states can be more than two. There's no limit to how many possible states an item can have, but it's always in one single state at a time. I could, for example, add more states. For example, I could add a locked state and say that the lever can't be pulled when it's locked. But let's not do that right now. For now, let's stick with the activated and deactivated options. Now you'll see that the action component has a bunch of different actions that have to do with these states. So there's two, in this case, set state kind of actions that activate and deactivate the lever. So all these do really is they switch the current state that is stored in the states component from one to the other. So it starts in default, and whenever this activate action is run, it switches the state to activated. And then the other actions you'll see in the lever are playing sound and playing animation, much like in the button. The only difference is that in this case there's two animations, one that moves the lever one way and the other moves the lever the other way. So to sum things up, whenever I pull the lever, three things happen. One is that the state changes between activated and deactivated, the other is that a sound plays, and the other is that an animation plays, either this one or the other. Now this is all handled in the trigger component. I will not dive into that just now, because there is some logic to that that will be easier to explain later. But for now, you need to understand that the lever has a state, which can be activated or deactivated, and we can use that in other smart items. So one thing we can try is this, like this button currently opens this door here. Now let's add another lever. This sci-fi lever kind of looks like a power switch. So let's put it on the wall. Let's turn it around 180 so it faces us. And let's pretend that this is the power switch. Now this lever, just like the other one, has a state which starts in deactivated and becomes activated when I turn it on. Now in this button here, in the trigger action that calls the door to be opened, let's add a trigger condition. So I can click these three dots here and add a trigger condition. And this trigger condition can reference any smart item in my scene. In this case, let's go for the sci-fi lever, which is this lever I just added. And let's make sure that the state is activated. So these actions that I put here will only happen if this condition is true. If this condition is not true, then these actions will be completely ignored. Let's see how that works out. Now I'm trying to press the button and nothing happens. But if I instead first activate the lever, now pressing the button opens the door. Now a good practice is to give some kind of alternative feedback when something doesn't work. For example, when I'm trying to open the door and the door won't respond, we need to tell the user, give them some kind of clue about what they need to do. So one thing I can do is add another trigger event. This trigger event should be of the same kind as the other one, and the difference would be that this one will have a condition that catches the opposite case. So in this other alternative condition, the sci-fi lever should be in the deactivated state. So now every time I click on the button, either this one will happen or this one will happen. And here I could, for example, show some text in the UI telling you that the power is down, or maybe, run some noise and glitchy noise that tells me that something is broken. I won't do that here in this example, but just know that this is a good option and a good practice to try to, make things clearer for your users. Another thing that I want to do is the following. So right now, if I press the button, the door is going to open every single time. Now, instead of toggling between open and close, let's keep it in just open, but let's handle this in another way, just so that I can show you another feature. So I have currently just one condition, but I can click this plus sign and have as many conditions as I want. Let's stretch this so that it's easier to read. So I have one condition that it has to do with the sci-fi lever. Let's add a second condition that has to do with the door. Make sure the door state is closed, or otherwise I can also do this door state is not open. So with this, I can also check that the door wasn't already open so that I don't run the animation twice. And you'll notice that when there's more than one trigger condition, you also have this field up here, which basically lets me select between two different criteria. One is that all of the conditions need to be met, and the other is that any of the conditions can be met. So in this case, I want both of these conditions to be true. I want the power to be up and the door to be not open. Otherwise, if I set the or, then with one of the two being true, that is enough for these actions to happen. In this case, I need the and. So now, if I try to open the door, nothing happens. If I put the power up, the door will open the first time, but if I try to open the door a second time, nothing will happen, which is what I wanted. Now, states exist in some smart items, but just as we saw in another video, we can also add states to items that are not smart, or we can augment our existing smart items with also additional states that we can invent. So in a previous video, I took this non-smart item, this bookshelf, and made it into a smart item. So when I click on this candle, the bookshelf will open. So in case you didn't see that other video, if I click on this candle, the door slides open. Now there's a problem with this though. If I click on the candle again, the door will keep sliding and will keep going through the wall. We don't want that to happen. So one way we can prevent that is to give our bookshelf states and handle it more like a door. So I can easily click the plus sign here and give my bookshelf states. And now you'll see that it has a brand new states component, and I can just add states. So I can add a closed state and make that the default, and add an open state. And I can change which is a default from here 3 dots. In order to switch between these two states, I need to also add actions in the action component. So let's add one action of kind set state to set open, and I want to switch to the open state, and let's add another action to also set state and call it set closed, and select the closed state. So now the bookshelf is capable of switching between those two states. Now we need to tell it when it will switch between these two states. Now this bookshelf does not have a trigger component of its own. For now, what we're doing is that the candle, which is also a smart item, has a trigger component that calls the bookshelf and calls the move action. One thing we can do is to add an additional action that also calls the bookshelf, and we call the set open action. And now in this very same trigger event, we add a trigger condition and we check that the bookshelf is not in the open state. So with this, we should be able to move the bookshelf just once. So now if I move the bookshelf once, it works correctly, but if I try to move it again, it will not move, and that is because the state is already set to open and it will not move a second time. Now it's a bit of a hassle that from the candle I have to call all of the different actions that the bookshelf contains. For example, if the bookshelf also had an action to play a sound, I would also need to call it from here. You might notice that when it comes to doors, for example, when I try to activate a door, I don't have to select all of the things that the door does, because the door also has 3 actions that it runs whenever it opens. it changes state, it plays an animation, and it plays a sound. But whenever I use a button to open the door, I'm not calling all of those internal actions. I'm just calling an action called open, and the door handles all of that internal logic on its own. And that's a pretty neat way to handle smart items. We can do a similar thing with the bookshelf too. So instead of the candle needing to know all of the internal actions of the bookshelf and calling these one by one, we can make it so that the candle only needs to call a set open action and doesn't need to know that a move action exists internally. So let's come back to our bookshelf, and we'll be adding one more action to the bookshelf just to illustrate this point a bit more clearly. Let's make it a play sound kind of action. And I'm just going to reuse a sound that we already have in our scene from the levers. So now, instead of expecting the candle to also call this play sound action, let's give the bookshelf its very own trigger component. And now we will add a trigger event, and this event won't be a click, it will be instead an on state change kind of trigger. So this actions that I put here will be called every time that the bookshelf's own state has changed. So in this case, we want to call the bookshelf's move action as well as the bookshelf's play sound action. And we don't want to do this every time the state changes. We want to do this only when the state changes to open, because the move action moves it in a particular direction. So we can add a trigger condition so that the bookshelf's state is open. So when the state changes and the new state is open, the bookshelf will move and play a sound. When the state changes and the bookshelf is not open, then nothing will happen for now. And on the candle, we now need to make a change, because the candle was previously needing to call the move action. We no longer need this. We just need to set the bookshelf's state to open, and then the bookshelf knows what to do. So let's see this in action. So when I move the candle, the bookshelf properly moves. I can move the bookshelf again, and now the bookshelf behaves more like a door or a chest, where I just need to call one action and everything else is handled internally. So that's what I wanted to share with you in this tutorial. I hope you found it fun and that it wasn't too much to handle. I hope that you can build great things with this, and hope to see you in the future in more tutorials. Thanks for watching. Bye.